you'll either laugh or roll your eyes. It is about people, process, and then technology. It really is. And although we want to kind of get to the end game, we really have to build a foundation for what that end game is going to really endure, and making sure that whatever that end game is, and think about whatever solution that you're trying to deploy right now or you might be interested in, the foundational piece is really important. So you can think about how, actually Kurtis, I'm gonna expand this view. No, just here. Yeah, actually, yeah. Sorry folks, I can't see much. There we go. Oh gosh. Nope. Well, we don't have to do that. Nope. It's okay. Great. So I go to that. That's great. Yep, good. I'll squint. Ratings down there. So that's okay. This is good. I'll probably break my neck looking at the screen. So what I want to talk about is, so this is where you typically want to start. You think about, okay, this is the end game, this is the application, this is what it's going to do. It's going to be so cool. We'll have analytics, we'll have all these cool interfaces. But at the same time, you have to think about the process, and what is the process that the people are going to have to understand from an expectations perspective, making sure that the end-to-end process, never mind the solution, is really solved. And Mark's keynote this morning about looking at the end state and then reverse engineering that's what this really describes. So we did not collaborate before, but I'm glad to see that he's of the same frame of mind. And so then we look at the people side. What is your people organization? What is your people internal processes today, and understanding the as is? And then what does the to be need to really look like? That is by far, and for those of you who've been through some kind of digital transformation or organizational change, I know there's a few of you in the room, this is the hardest part of getting to the solution. So never mind the solution for a minute. You need to empower your folks. You need to create a bunch of believers. You need to identify who your champions are. Who's going to follow, and I'll get to it here in a second, the mission, the vision, and the values. Who's really going to buy into that? Because it will take a community to deploy something as simple, and I'm not saying developing solutions is simple, but something as simple as a technology you can buy off the shelf. This is the hardest part of what you're going to endure. And so I focus on, you'll see on the far left there, bench strength. What is the bench strength within your team that's going to set you up for success, no matter what the solution is? And guaranteed, the solution is going to change over time. But if your foundation is set, that's a really important fabric of enduring whatever it is. We're going into machine learning and AI, and it's actually starting to take off. But if you don't have a foundation, you're not going to realize the results. And that's why digital transformations failed for the last 15 years. We neglect that bottom layer. And for that matter, we neglect the second layer because we don't get there. So this might sound really cliche and kind of, come on, Gary, let's get past this mission, vision, values. But I'll tell you what, this is so important. So Kurtis highlighted, I worked with an operator in the past, Synovus Energy, ConocoPhillips. I've spent years working on integrated operations and digital solutions. Not so much as I know enough to be dangerous to do what Kurtis and his team do, per se, but to say, I know how to build a team, and I know that it can never be perfect. We shouldn't expect perfection, but it also requires vision, it requires a mission statement, and it requires your team to understand what the values are of what you're trying to do. So that's a lot of effort to then say, hey, by the way, there's this cool app and it does these really cool things. You need to start here, and this is really the foundational one of it. You see some stats on the side, they're not made up. This is from a few years ago, where you'll see, and I'm just going to step over here for a second, you'll see that employees are interrupted 56 times per day. This is from a few years ago. This typically is around office staff or folks that are in the field receiving calls from all ends of the spectrum, their engineer, their foreman, their lead, the tech, maybe there's a service provider, maybe somebody needs a permit. They're distracted multiple times per day. There's a significant impact to that. And not only time efficiency, but safety, mind on task, line of fire, those kind of things really start to creep in the more and more your individuals are distracted, no matter their experience level. And so if you can reduce, you'll never eliminate it, but if you can reduce it and get into a structured and disciplined approach, not only does it affect efficiency, the bottom line, millions and millions of dollars in savings, all the stuff that you've heard, but there's a really significant safety component to this as well. What's the next one? 75% of workers don't believe they have access to the right technology. And that's so true. I don't know if we'll ever accomplish it because it's moving so fast. It's moving at a pace faster than we can adopt and deploy. And that's also a formula for never getting off the ground and never taking off. You're waiting for the next best thing. Oh, let's not do it now. This next thing is coming. But guess what? You get left in the dust and you don't progress. And most importantly, you don't get the support of your folks. You don't get the support of your team and your organization because you never got there. Well, we're just gonna go back to paper and pen because this thing is never going to happen. Take a risk and in some cases, fail fast and learn faster. And then lastly, look at this, workload and work overload. We all see this, we all endure this. It's do more with less. This is where the solutions and the technology, the enabling factors can really come in. But they won't really be realized unless you look at that foundational piece from people, process, and technology perspective. So I don't know if there's anybody from one of my old teams in the room, but I always like to talk about the pit crew and the fabric of a pit crew and what's the ultimate goal for a pit crew. And if things go poorly, what happens? Well, you lose the race. If they go well, you win the race, but it's a collective. And in a pit crew, if you don't know what your objective and your responsibility and where you need to be every second of that, 5 to 6 second little exercise is, it's going to go poorly. And your statistics and your analytics are going to show that we were off trend, what happened, lessons learned, continuous improvement, all of those things. But if you set a foundation and help everybody, one, have the right skills, and two, understand what their objectives are for the broader scope of what they're trying to accomplish is, that's a recipe for success. So, case in point, I've done several integrated operations deployments. It was encompassed around an operations center, but at the same time, it was about empowering and upskilling the people within that team to make it ultimately successful and sustainable. And then you can ebb and flow and you can scale and be flexible for no matter what comes at you. Okay, so how do you start? And this may seem really, really simple, but this is probably the biggest effort from a start perspective with sustaining your business intelligence. And it really does kind of come down to what one of my old colleagues used to say, the forensic analysis of what you're trying to accomplish. And very simply stated, and it doesn't have to be any more complex than this, diagnose, make sure you take the time and the effort to do the deep dive. Understand what the root problem is. What are you trying to solve? You may have some assumptions of what you're trying to solve from a problem perspective, but you need to hear from your folks, you need to hear from the broader organization. You look at the macro and the micro effects of what you're trying to accomplish. That deep dive, even though it may be somewhat painful and arduous, that is probably the most valuable component of your implementation program to ensure that when you get to identifying your critical streams and eventually what that solution is going to be, you're really, really sure. You haven't guessed or you haven't missed any steps or you're not making assumptions along the way, because those assumptions, as you deploy solution A, B, or C, or X, if you miss something in your deep dive or in your initial analysis, you probably missed a core fundamental component of what you're trying to solve. And it will avoid rework, frustration at the workforce, the folks who are actually being asked to use whatever it is you're trying to deploy. or adopt a process that you're pressing upon them. And so it's really, really important. So from there, then you can get into strategize. What's your plan? And how does it fit into your overarching goals? You can focus back to the mission, vision, values of what you're creating for your team, but it might go broader than that. What's the mission, vision, value, and the kind of core concepts and core priorities for your broader organization? Is what you're doing and what you're leading toward fit in and align with even a corporate strategy at that point? Development and planning, so that's kind of where you get into the tactical piece. What happens when, who needs to do what? Do we have the right skills? What are the components that we're going to put into our critical streams? And we'll talk about that here in a second. But that's a really important step as well. And then communicate. So from a change management perspective, this is one area where things typically fall off the rails. And so, even though it's at the bottom of the list, that communicate and communicate and communicate, and having folks within your organization that have now been branded or identified as change agents or champions, or that are tasked to lead certain components of whatever initiative or technology or solution you're looking to deploy. Your messages, one, have to be believable. Two, they have to be open-ended in the sense that you need to hear back from the broader organization to ensure that, I haven't missed something. But at the same time, pressing upon a sense of ownership within the I'll call it, in this case, because we're talking technology today, the end user spectrum, right? And making sure that they really understand, back to the previous slide, the why. Why is it important? What's the purpose? What part do I have to play in all of this? That's all part of that change management and that communication component of this. And although it won't be perfect, and these types of deployments, whether it's AbaData and field ops or other solutions, they're always typically going to be a little bit bumpy, but at least you're setting yourself up for a reasonable level of success over a period of time. So on the focus areas, I kind of struggled with this to put out a broad kind of statement from an operations excellence perspective. Do I call this a management system? I could, and I have in the past. Do I call this OE just to, branded as ops excellence? But I really call this a framework for success as you get off the ground. And these core components, if any of you have been part of a management system, an assurance program, you have elements and you have requirements, and you typically have assurances that go around that. Well, these, in my mind, are critical streams that will allow you to, one, identify the core elements that you need to embed into your program, and then also being able to follow up on those, do health checks, assurance activities. I'm not going to say the word audit, because audit's like, ooh, let's not do that. But let's talk about assurance and making sure that, one, we're following up with end users in this case, folks that are being asked to follow a new process or a new way of working, and that we have a continuous improvement cycle in there. So you can read them as well as I can, but it really does from 12 o'clock all the way around to 11 and back to 12. It's the people, process, and technology component. So we're going to bench strength, focus on your processes, identify the core components and the important components of what those processes need to be. I'm an operations guy. I hated process, but at the same time, it's really essential. So find a middle ground and make it something that is digestible, but it's not overbearing, and it's not bureaucratic, and it doesn't feel ridiculous. It feels meaningful. Asset infrastructure. What are you trying to solve? What are the parts of your business that you're actually trying to improve upon? It could be wells, it could be pipelines, it could be data capture, it could be compliance, whatever it might be. Let's make sure we identify those, and we can circle back, and we can assure that we're still focusing on the right things. Collaboration, that's the big people side, from multiple functions now being asked to collaborate, integrate, eliminate duplication of effort, all of those things that I'm sure you've heard in the past. And then we get into the foundational data side. Do you have a data plan? Do you have a data structure? Do you have a data model? Do you have a governance team? Do you have the right upskill to manage your data before you then put the enablers on top? And lastly, I think it was said this morning as well, start small and scale fast. Don't try and boil the ocean. That's really important. in the sense of I'll even speak to field ops with Kurtis and team. By the time we were into year 2.5, I think we had 15 or 16 modules in there doing all the compliance tasks and operational tasks. Well, we started with 4. 4 for the reason of we didn't want to overwhelm the end user. We wanted to immerse them into a new way of working, and we wanted to ensure that we were learning along the way as we kind of came out of our infancy into a much more mature platform, and we brought our people along with it. So it was a really successful mindset in starting small and then scaling appropriately or scaling fast. So now we get into how do we diagnose and build a framework and then deploy and get into continuous improvement. This is focused on technology, this slide. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here, but it is really about building that foundation, a modular deployment, making sure that it's strategic in nature, but it's tactical at the same time, so it resonates well with those who are actually being asked to do the function, no matter what it might be. It can be really in-depth reservoir characterization analysis, or it could be something as simple as entering a task into a mobile device versus the old negative report that they'd have. Before we get to assessment and continuous improvement, you'll see a line at the bottom that looks at data quality improvements. So this is a residual benefit of just taking a risk and getting things going and moving along and iterating almost in an agile way. By nature, your data that'll be exposed, you'll realize how bad it is. I think we've all lived that. You'll realize how bad it is and where the outliers are and the anomalies are, but at the same time, while you're building the ship, you'll actually start to identify some of those areas that really need some additional attention, but you're not trying to front-end load perfection of your data, and nor should you, because that will really handcuff you in growing from a start small and scale fast perspective. So that's a natural progression, and you need to be okay with that. You should accept the fact that we're going to find things that aren't as we expected, but at the same time, you have a mechanism to go and correct. Then we get into value assessment and continuous improvement. If you're talking to the leaders or the executives, and you've gone to spend a bunch of capital dollars, what's the return on it? You need to be able to prove that out. So always keep in mind, what are your KPIs going to be? And then at the same time, as you observe and evaluate those KPIs, you will have lessons learned, you will find opportunities for improvement. Make sure that from a change management perspective, you have that continuous improvement cycle embedded in, and you have somebody that can support that within your organization, because that's really essential to ensure that you can go from left to right and then back around and continue this cycle. So here's a similar graph, but this one is focused just on people and process. So it's nothing to do necessarily with a solution or an enabler. This is the foundation build kind of components, and I'll talk about them just in brief terms. So if any of you, again, have been through any type of organizational change management, solution deployment, whether it was a SCADA system or an app or some kind of an analytics tool, it was obviously probably a lot of debate at the beginning. What are we going to do? What is our goal? All of those things. But it was probably a scenario where things were very fragmented. Not necessarily from your data is fragmented, that's probably the case as well. But your organization may be fragmented as well. You may have silos. You may have functions that don't communicate as well. I see some head nodding here. It's fantastic. I lived it too. I'll curl up in a ball in the corner here if we keep talking about it. But at the same time, that's really important to identify that you have, and you are going to come across misalignment. It's not that anybody is, kind of, I would say, sinister in nature. It's just, if you're working in silos, if you're working in your day-to-day and you're not focusing on what other key implementers or key stakeholders within your groups are doing, it's by nature that you're going to just kind of stay in that lane and not really realize that if you collaborate, you develop some integrations within your processes that will start to eliminate the duplication of effort. Oh, I didn't know you were doing that. I'm doing the same thing. All of those things start to really come to light, and then you can get into the next step of the integration. From there, you build your strategic alignment, and you go through your organizational change. And just very quickly, you probably read them already. Identify, validate, and implement. and that's really about the people process side. The technology comes after this. There's another bubble over here. That's where the technology comes in. This is really setting that foundation, making sure the folks who are going to be impacted by, say, change, are well aware, and you have a systematic approach to wherever you're going to take this. Setting milestones and roadmaps is really important as well. Visualizing for those who are going to be impacted as part of that change routine can really help paint a picture. Some people like 3 procedures, others pictures speak 1,000 words. So incorporate different modes of communication and tendencies into your change management as well. Okay, so this one is really great, I apologize. But this is typically a day in the life of what a people process technology component could look like. And you know, you could replace the boxes that say, well, data book and all these things with field offices, different workflows, or some kind of other analytics tool that you're working on right now. But the point of this slide is really to show that although some of the functions and some of the very specific tasks may seem segregated, at the end of the day, they all need to generate opportunities to then create results, sustainability, operations efficiencies, and all those things. And I'm not going to spend any more time on this one necessarily, but I really wanted to show a real world case. This slide and this visual for me with my teams is ultimately beneficial to paint that picture to show, yes, it can be done, and it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be any more than this stick diagram that is just a little bit better than my Cradle to Crayons. So take that into account. And lastly, what we're trying to do, the typical results that we would like to see from a field operator perspective, they have different impacts, they have different results, they have different needs at a field operations perspective. Much the same as operations management. What is your operations management, your leadership team? That's a little closer to driving business initiatives. They want to be able to see things in nature from an analytics perspective to understand how is their business operating, how is their operation performing, and then ultimately, just like the field operator, make better decisions. And then of course, what are we looking at from a business performance perspective? This is nothing new, but safe operations. Get that at the top, because that's really important to anybody in the oil and gas sector. I've been there, I am there, and that is by far the biggest impact that you can realize. And if you can realize safe operation, everything else kind of just falls in line. Your cost rationalization, cost reductions, reduced unplanned deferments, all of those things, they really start to fall in line. Okay, so lastly, and then I'll open up for questions. We're going to talk about this a little bit more this afternoon in the panel discussion, but because this is digitization and AI kind of a day, I did want to talk about what is that end state. And right now the buzzword is machine learning and AI, all those things. And yes, you can get there, but it should not be what you're focused on. It should not be the thing that you are trying to accomplish today. It can be part of your end recipe, absolutely. And that's what this slide really depicts, is it's a journey. And so from a practical standpoint, and if I put my business hat on for a second, this multi-year journey, which is starting to become a lot shorter. If you looked at this slide 3 years ago, AI was 4 or 5 years out. Now we're really, really close to realizing true benefits and real apparent benefits of what AI and machine learning can do. But at the same time, while you're trying to build towards that, you can generate immense results. So don't lose sight of that, and don't try to just focus on what that end state is. Know that it is foundational all in itself, and that through that journey, you will realize benefits, and you'll have a lot less internal and weight that makes sure that when you get to deploying an AI, it's as good as it can be. I didn't say perfect, because it never will be, but it's as good as it can be for that moment in time. And so with that, I would open up for questions. I almost stopped talking to you, but I'm not. I don't think we need a mic, so do you have any questions or comments? Yes, you in the middle there?
You talked about AI, and then at the other part of that, years, success criteria, you had data management there.
Mhm.
Is the drive from leadership for AI changing that initial foundation of data management, that critical area of focus?
It should. So the answer today is, again, I'll remind him, if you asked me that question 3 years ago, the answer would be absolutely not. Everybody wants the buzzkill word, and I say that truly buzzkill because it is, you want it, but you know you can't have it, so you lose energy, you lose appetite, and you move on to something else. In some cases, maybe back to pen and paper. But today, in the discussions I'm having at industry, it's becoming more and more of a realization that that data foundation, that data why, and that data governance and structure is essential. And the realization, yeah, in order to get to be, you need to accomplish data first.
I just saw lots of folks in the room like nod their head when you were talking about discovering that the quality of your data. And think about our leadership pushing us for the AI component, and it's like, okay, that's saying like more quality data. This now you're trying to bring AI out of it and say, what are our decisions? Right?
And the other thing to that too is there's a lot more acceptance today than there was in my experience than there ever has been. Bad data is okay. It really is. You're going to come across that. Don't let it be a derailer of what you're trying to accomplish. Just have the motive intent to go and correct it. And I think that's becoming more and more a true realization. Thinking about fit for purpose and practical approaches to this. We want AI because it's the coolest thing. Yeah, but we don't want to do what's required to get there. That's starting to flip because we're starting to really see the value of what AI and machine learning can do and how it can truly change the worker's experience. And so maybe there's a little bit more investment on that foundation piece. Yeah. Wrong. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
You talked a little bit about, when you were dealing with data or when you're implementing new things about, putting assurance in place, and you didn't want to say audit. I think that's one of the things that we struggle a lot with in our business. And I'm just curious if you can elaborate on some of the things you did a little bit more and kind of provide a better framework for implementing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And where this comes from is from lessons learned. So thinking back to years past and assurance activities that felt like an audit, it felt punitive, and it felt like, man, I'm actually being distracted because of this audit that's coming. Not to say that the assurance activity isn't important, but it's much more of an organic growth. So I would say, kind of taking it into account of don't let the assurance and governance process that is really important to, invoke continuous improvement and lesson learned be the guiding principle of your initiative. Have it be a supporting actor. In the past, I've been through operations excellence programs where it was like, this is how you will operate, and it will all be abiding by these governances that will then be audited. Right then and there, you're putting a bad taste in everyone's mouth as to what's coming. Whereas, let's show the why. Let's show how this enabling factor can be really beneficial and very helpful to the overarching organization. But then at the same time, we're going to use this supporting actor called assurance activity and health checks to say, hey, how's it going? I want to hear from you. Not so much, have you done this? Black and white check box, yes or no. It's more of a softer approach, and that's why that champion and that right upskilled group of folks in your team to come in and approach it that way is really, really important. Now, at the end of the day, the spreadsheet that has all the check marks, and yes, it's here's where we're good and here's where we're not, will look very much similar to what an audit process is, but it can be approached in a lot more meaningful ways. So if anybody's a field operator out here, you did downtime coding for years, you never got anything out of it. So why am I doing it? So you're gonna put a haphazard job into it. Assurance activities are the same way. If there's an output that can show folks how they can improve and honest and supporting feedback, all of a sudden they realize, this process is actually really valuable. I'm learning something from this. These are the best practices and knowledge sharing and success stories. Or here's where we're doing really well, and here's areas where we have to improve upon. And so that's been the evolution for me, that softer approach about having to be thou shalt. We're going to help guide the process.
Yeah.
And it's along the lines of introducing, new tools, change. Especially with AI, the same habits and replace people. Whereas, you take that you're an input that creates the output. Now, you have some insight on how you introduce those kind of tools, change that they, scare people a little bit.
So a couple things, and I'll tell a little bit of the story. So yes, and probably know where I'm going. Integrated operations came into the fold, and it was kind of the buzzword before digital transformation and IoT back in the mid 2000s. And with that whole deployment and program type of nature, you saw a lot of folks sitting there in the room going, "You're here to take my job." And I was happy to say, well, 15 years later, I sat with the same individual that kind of pointed me out and said, "Well, you're here to take my job." I said, "Oh, it's good to see you're still here." Right? And so I guess my point there is the approach to ensuring that you avoid that as much as possible. I don't think you're going to eliminate that stigma of any type of change, whether it's AI or whatever it might be. But also ensuring that you do have that communication component and that change management component that says, this is the purpose and here's the why. This is how it's going to benefit you as an individual or as a group or as a team or as a big crew. And you should start to receive improved buy-in. I'm not going to say all buy-in. There's a change management curve. It's always going to be there. You're going to have your laggards and your detractors. It just take a long time for never buying into a process. I don't think any methodology will ever change that. But to bring more folks along into the top end of the curve or the bottom end of the curve from an early adopter perspective is showing them the why and the purpose, and then also upskilling them. So we had a conversation earlier today about, and I'm one of them, the gray-haired operators. They love paper and pen. They love the way they used to do things. And I did too, all right? I think that's everyone's nature. But at the same time, spending a little bit of extra time and investing time to not only socialize whatever the change is, but also ensuring that they have the right skill sets to pick up a mobile app and use it comfortably and confidently can be an absolute game changer. So that's why I say that component of the communication is so essential in whatever you're going to do that you'll thank yourself if you spent more time in that space and really methodical in your approach. And almost cater to the individual, because you're going to come across the characters too that are maybe a little harder, a little bit more abrasive, or you buddy them up with somebody who is an early adopter that can really champion them and guide them along. Yeah. I think the other one, and I'll add to that, and then maybe somebody else has a hand come up, is centralization. So in initial deployment, I'll talk about integrated operations. It was a massive restructure of the way we work, right? In one of my deployments I did in the lower 48. And in that space, we in order to get the new way of working off the ground and have it become successful in a reasonable period of time, we actually centralized those skill sets into an operations center, into a small subset of specialists in order to really show what working in a new way could do. And that was kind of like, okay, roadmap year one, this is how we're going to do it. Roadmap year two, we're just going to bring those folks in that were maybe a little skeptical and, it's just, this is going to go away, so I'm not going to pay attention to it. Start to slowly introduce them a little bit more. And before you know it, that centralization becomes a broad spectrum of everybody on the same playing field. So that's another way to do it. If the organization is willing to endure that initial change, that centralization, it is a fundamental change. Thinking about changing roles and responsibilities, what are your objectives and all of those things, but if that has been successful as well. Especially if you're down to the time. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to change management and managing expectation for the other users?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, absolutely. And where I'm going to go back to that is, in order to manage expectation, you also have to ensure that you're not overwhelming the individual or the group of individuals. That goes back to trying not to boil the ocean. And that early adoption is usually more focused on the change management than actually adopting or implementing the tool itself. And so they really complement each other. Don't try to boil the ocean and expect grand results. So if you start small and then scale appropriately or scale fast, that should accomplish both of those components. I can spend an hour alone just talking about what that could look like. I don't know if you want me to elaborate anymore.
Good that. Okay. Yep.
Okay. All right, well, I'm gonna hang around here for the next 10, 15 minutes or so. So if you have any other questions or if you want to come up and have a chat or do you need out of it, any of these conversations for comments, I appreciate it. Thank you.